Welcome to By Seat and By Saddle, seeing North America by car and by motorcycle. After our retirement in 2011, my wife Sue and I made a number of road trips around North America, taking pictures of what we saw and recording what we did. Thinking our experiences might be useful to others planning similar road trips, we decided to preserve and share our travel diaries. We had a great little Suzuki motorcycle that we rode around home, and if we wanted to explore roads far from home, we carried it on a tiny Canadian snow bear trailer. In preparation for further distance traveling, I replaced the pillion cushion on the rear fender of the motorcycle with a garden tractor seat so that Sue would be completely comfortable over the many hours we spent on the bike. I also fastened some plywood walls and a roof to the trailer and installed a wash basin and a portable toilet to make us completely independent. We towed the trailer and motorcycle with the small 1.8-liter Pontiac Vibe. We folded down the rear seat in the Vibe, a great feature in that car, and added a foam mattress. With a small fan, a hanging light, and our laptop, we were as cozy and comfortable as sleeping in a mini motel. Later, we upgraded to an 803cc Suzuki and eventually to a 2.5-liter Toyota RAV4 car, but this will all be evident from the pictures and descriptions that follow. This is the story of one of our trips, a trip we took in April of 2013. We first traveled south and west quickly, looking for temperatures and sun that would dim our memory of the Canadian winter we'd just gone through. So, we begin this diary on April 6th on the Mississippi River near Natchez in the state of Mississippi. However, as with the other trip diaries on this channel, we have also created a list of trip highlights, should you want to see other items that might be of more interest to you. So come on and travel with us. We will take you along with words and photographs. It's a pleasure to share them with you. Some miles from a campground, our road was blocked by a fallen tree. A detour was impossible and cars started piling up behind us. Suddenly, one driver jumped out, opened his trunk, and pulled out a chainsaw. How many people keep a chainsaw in their trunk? We wondered what other stuff he might have in there too. Anyway, we were happy to be going again. Incidentally, the photograph also shows the hole in the back of our trailer that we had to cut to fit in our bigger motorcycle. At the campground, we unloaded our motorcycle and immediately rode over to the Mississippi River. Moored at the wharf was a riverboat called the Isle of Capri, Natchez. The Isle of Capri was a hotel and casino and very attractively appointed. In the 1830s, the wild Mississippi river towns started banning gambling and prostitution, but they had no jurisdiction over the waterways. Hence, the riverboats became perfect venues for these businesses. They have a long history on the Mississippi. Natchez welcomes visitors, and so we rode over to the visitor center to find out what was going on and what there was to see. We passed this old barn on the way. It seemed worth a picture, but needed more than just a little paint. The Natchez Trace Parkway is a 444-mile-long recreational road and scenic trail that starts in Natchez and passes through 3 states. The old Natchez Trace is part of it and is famous because it dates back 10,000 years and is one of the oldest communication routes in North America. By the way, we didn't know that trace is just a French word for track. Natchez rightly takes pride in its many antebellum houses. These are houses built before the Civil War, and Natchez has more than any other place in the U.S. It is thought these homes avoided destruction during the Civil War because Natchez was not strategically located and probably also because it had voted against secession. This sign was a somber reminder of the long history that has come and gone in this region. The city sightseeing bus was a chance to see the busy Mississippi River barge and boat traffic, as well as many other city sights. The Natchez City Cemetery contains the graves of people from all walks of life, but significantly also the graves of unknown Confederate soldiers. It is thought that these were casualties of the Battle of Raymond, fought on May 12, 1863. The Confederate gravestones all contain the letters CSA, which is an acronym for Confederate States of America. The Confederate States of America were 11 states that seceded from the United States in 1860 after the election of President Abraham Lincoln. They constituted an unrecognized breakaway republic that existed from February the 8th, 1861 to May the 5th, 1865. They were South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina. At the time we visited the cemetery, the CSA gravestones also had a flag that was used as a battle flag by the Confederate Army and is a commonly recognized symbol of the Confederacy. The flags seem to be temporary and we suspect were part of widespread Civil War sesquicentennial commemorations. Sesquicentennial means 150 years, and our visit to Natchez was almost exactly 150 years after the Battle of Raymond, in which most of these soldiers were likely lost. The Natchez Native Americans lived in permanent houses of mud and pole construction with thatched grass roofs. This example is in the Grand Village of the Natchez Indians, a museum and a 128-acre park. The indigenous Natchez people built large mounds for burials, ceremonies, and religious activities. This is Emerald Mound, the second largest of its period in the United States. It was built between 1200 and 1730 CE. Covers 8 acres, its dimensions are 770 feet by 435 feet, and it is 35 feet high. About 45 miles northeast of Natchez is Port Gibson. That was the perfect distance for a motorcycle day trip. The most powerful single-reactor nuclear power plant in the U.S. is located in Port Gibson. It is the 1,433-megawatt boiling water reactor made by General Electric and is said to be the most affordable source of electricity in Mississippi. On the short nuclear plant access road, we spotted a yellow school bus that looked like it was being devoured by creeping vines in a bad horror movie. Minstrel shows are said to be the first distinctly American form of theater, and started way back in the 1830s and 1840s. They presented comedy skits and song and dance routines to mixed audiences across the South. One of the most popular groups was the Port Gibson-based Rabbit Foot Minstrels. They played a major role spreading blues music between 1918 and 1950. As pointed out in Trip Number 5, Part 2, the invention of blues music by African Americans in the Mississippi Delta is recognized as the only music original to America. It subsequently gave rise to jazz, rhythm and blues, and rock and roll. Before leaving Natchez, we spent some time watching the Mississippi River boat traffic, and later took pictures with the Mississippi River in the background. The sun was going down across the river when we climbed on a motorcycle to return to our campground. We happened to catch a stunning evening photograph from the motorcycle as we approached the Natchez Vidalia Bridge. The setting sun had just begun glinting off the trusses of the two bridges. Our next destination was the Johnson Space Center in Houston, a bit over 300 miles and about 5.5 hours away. However, passing through Louisiana, we took time for a picture of some flowers. Can't recall the location. We have now arrived in Houston and are at the NASA Johnson Space Center. The space shuttle is monstrous and made an awesome first impression as we arrived. The unit on display is a full-scale, high-fidelity replica named Independence that arrived at the Johnson Space Center in 2012. In 2014, the year after we took these pictures, it was placed on top of a Boeing 747 shuttle carrier aircraft, and both are now displayed in a part of the Space Center called Independence Plaza. The Space Center provided a 53-acre plot of land beside the Saturn rocket building for the so-called Longhorn Project. It is also referred to as the Center for Agriculture, Science, and Engineering. It provides agricultural training to selected local students, particularly in the care and exhibition of Texas Longhorn cattle. This is the picture of the outside wall of Building 47, and I'm not sure why I took it since it's not even labeled. Google says the building is used for the integration of Space Launch Systems core stage sub-assemblies. What does that even mean? The outside of this building is labeled, at least. It is the Christopher C. Kraft Jr. Mission Control Center. We are now inside the visitors gallery of the historic Mission Control Center. This control center monitored 9 Gemini and all Apollo moon missions from the first mission, Apollo 11, to the final one, Apollo 17. We found a seat in the visitors gallery and waited for the guide. Here is a recording of the famous words Neil Armstrong and Houston Control exchanged at the moment of touchdown on the moon. 650 million people in the U.S. and around the world were watching and listening. I think we in the gallery, now 44 years later, could still somehow feel the excitement in that room when Armstrong confirmed a safe touchdown.
Okay, engine stop. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
The guide made a great presentation on the moon mission and at the end asked for questions. One young boy raised his hand and asked, "What if one of the astronauts had to go to the bathroom?" There was a moment of silence before a voice from the back of the room piped up, "Houston, we have a problem." It got quite a laugh. Just a reminder of some of the astronauts' names, which are so familiar to those of us who were alive in the 60s and 70s. Grissom, White, and Chaffee on Apollo 1, Armstrong, Collins, and Aldrin on Apollo 11, and Lovett, Swaggart, and Hayes on Apollo 13. Inside that building, just across from the Longhorn Cattle, was the actual Saturn V rocket. It was an awe-inspiring sight. The upper section of the rocket has been separated from the lower launch parts for better visitor viewing. The following diagrams clearly explain what all the components in this section are. This diagram labels the main components in the upper section. They are the Lunar Module, or LM, the Spacecraft to Lunar Module Adapter, or SLA, the Service Module, or SM, and the Command Module, or CM. The Lunar Module is the assembly that flies down and lands on the Moon with the astronauts. The Spacecraft to Lunar Module Adapter covers the Lunar Module during the early stages of flight. In this diagram, the figure on the right shows the SLA with the Lunar Module tucked inside, its legs folded. The left-hand figure shows how the SLA opens to release the Lunar Module, like petals on a flower. In the photo we took, the Spacecraft to Lunar Module Adapter is the white funnel-shaped part behind the visitor. The Lunar Module is not visible and may have had its own separate display. On top of the SLA sits a cylindrical gray segment, which is the Service Module, and on top of the Service Module sits the conical segment that is the astronaut's cockpit or Command Module. The names of the Command Module and Service Module are combined into one name, the Command and Service Module, or CSM. A single name makes later explanations easier. On the way to the Moon, the Command and Service Module, or CSM, separates from the SLA, turns around and comes back to the SLA, which then splits open. The CSM then connects and withdraws the Lunar Module and carries it into lunar orbit. There, the Lunar Module detaches to descend to the Moon's surface while the CSM remains in lunar orbit. The Apollo 13 moon mission was a succession of miracles combined with incredible technical genius. En route to the Moon, an explosion destroyed the Service Module. The three astronauts, James Lovell, Fred Hayes, and John Swigert, escaped certain death by climbing into the Lunar Module. Then, before re-entry and splashdown, the crew transferred back from the Lunar Module into the Command Module. The Service Module was then jettisoned, followed shortly thereafter by the Lunar Module. Splashdown occurred on April 17, 1970 at 1:07 p.m. There's an incredible Netflix documentary called Apollo 13 Survival that no one should miss. The massive F-1 rocket engines on the Saturn V each weighed 15,650 pounds and developed a thrust of 1.5 million pounds. They powered the first stage of the launch and only burned for 2.5 minutes. Other, smaller rocket engines powered the second and third stages. Each Saturn V rocket had 5 of these F-1 engines. Apollo 17 was the last Apollo mission to the Moon and took place December 7th to 19th, 1972. It was crewed by Eugene Cernan, Harrison Schmitt, and Ron Evans. The lunar rover on Apollo 17 was much like a golf cart and had a range of 55 miles. It made possible the greatest distance ever traveled on the Moon and enabled collection of the largest number of rock and soil samples. We attended some great presentations. This is the actual command module of the Apollo 17 mission. Its underside was badly charred by the frictional heat of re-entry. The Space Center provided a chance to look at and touch moon rock samples. Lunar Touchstone is one of only 8 moon rocks in the world that can be touched because most contain lunar dust with sharp edges that can damage health. The displays of moon rock and soil samples included a poster with a very positive and hopeful message that the abundance of helium-3 on the lunar surface was a fusion fuel supply for unlimited future energy production, both on Earth and in space. Although the moon missions ended in 1972, Apollo parts and equipment continued being used in space research, with the main focus becoming Earth orbit. Skylab was the first American orbiting space station, launched on May 14, 1973. Interestingly, its living quarters were simply an empty third stage of the Saturn V rocket. The next step, in 1975, was the first cooperation with the Russian space program. It involved connecting an American Command and Service Module, or CSM, to a Russian Soyuz vehicle. Design of this docking mechanism to connect the two vehicles was a major accomplishment. The preceding displays were located in Houston's Starship Gallery. For historical perspective, the gallery also included a display of the Faith 7 Mercury space capsule. The Mercury program was America's first program to launch humans into Earth orbit. The Apollo program was extremely expensive, and with the shift in focus from accessing the Moon to orbiting the Earth, a decision was made to switch from rockets to reusable space vehicles, hence the birth of the shuttle program. The display of a shuttle cockpit really reinforced our respect for any pilot able to fly shuttles. I tried to capture the video of a space shuttle launch in the Space Center auditorium. It turned out not too badly, and so I've included it. Well, we have reached the end of part 1. Interesting sights and adventures on the rest of trip number 9 remain to be uploaded. These will include pictures and descriptions in some of the following places: Offshore Oil Rig Museum in Galveston, Bandera, Texas, World Cowboy Capital, the Alamo, San Antonio, the Fence Post Boots Tradition, Big Bend National Park, Talingua, Texas, Presidio, Texas, Boquillas Canyon, Hot Springs Trail, Hot Springs National Park, and Seminole Canyon State Historical Park.